Tim, let's talk about what's going on in Ukraine.
Yeah,
Extremely cold weather over
yeah,
here. Are you seeing there a clear sign in a slowdown in fighting?
yeah. Yes, I think if we go back a little bit, in military doctrine, we have what's called a culminating point, where an offensive that's being conducted suddenly realizes it needs to pause and take stock and draw up its logistics
And
and
that's where we're at.
sort itself out. And that's what happened with the Russians. And they decided to pull back across the river at Kherson and just recognize that they had stretched themselves too far, particularly from a logistic point of view. So that happened a while ago. They've been consolidating, they've been reinforcing, they've been sorting themselves out a bit. The weather undoubtedly has made a difference. I don't think the Ukraine, who knows? I ought to say that straight away. I don't know what's going to happen next. But the Ukrainians have had a tough year and they've lost a lot of people and they're obviously being hit hard in their infrastructure. The Russians, I don't think, want to start a military offensive this side of Christmas, but they're using, obviously, the opportunity to hit cities and various other places with the drones and the guided missiles and artillery and so forth. I don't think the Ukrainians are in a position to conduct offensive operations now, but I think there could be a winter offensive in the new year and certainly something coming together in the spring and summer on both sides.
Tim, just very briefly, Ukraine thermal and hydroelectric power stations, they've been damaged by Russian missile
Yeah.
strikes. How concerned should we be about the energy situation there in Ukraine?
I think the energy situation in Ukraine as a whole is a serious concern, and I think there are lots of people trying to solve this. But I think for the West, flying in generators and the fuel to power up those generators is going to be a big issue, undoubtedly, at the moment.
If we could just touch on the news about what's going on with the strikes,
Yeah,
because
sure.
there's been so much discussion about the role specifically, and this is what this Cobra meeting has been about with the
Yeah.
government tonight, on drafting the military and what they might do, whether they can drive ambulances, what the situation is if a military vehicle goes through a red light, for example. What's your take on using the military? Because it seems that it's popular with the public.
I think it's popular in the military too. I'm conscious that there have been various statements made by various individuals in this context, some of whom I know well and don't disagree with strongly. But if we go back to the sort of beginning of this, we have this thing called the military aid to the civil power, which is what happened in Northern Ireland in the 70s and 80s, security. And then there's military aid to the civil authorities, which is what we've done for many, many years, many decades, actually. And it means we support things like fuel strikes and droughts and floods and all sorts of issues that we've been involved with over the years, prison strikes and all sorts of other stuff. And actually, it's been relatively quiet relatively recently. Over the last 10, 15 years, we haven't done much of this. We did a bit during COVID, of course, with the hospital and so on. What's happening at the moment is a sort of perfect storm coming together of an enormous number of these strikes. But I've been involved in a few over the years that I was serving, and I always enjoyed being involved. Great opportunities for our young NCOs and our soldiers and sailors and airmen to engage with the public and do something that I think is really important. There is a network around the country of brigade headquarters who are linked in to the local resilience forums that are run by the councils. And there's a 3-star headquarters. A Lieutenant General runs a headquarters in Aldershot, which is where I come from, which is the main headquarters for planning and executing these sorts of things. So they've got lots of plans in place. They won't be phased by this. Having said that, we do need to recognise and manage expectations. That the Army is a much smaller organisation than it was when I was serving.
Yeah.
And we have still got deployments around the world. But we do have certain skills. Driving ambulances, we have medical regiments, guys and girls who drive ambulances on battlefields, bringing casualties in to the field hospital and so forth. We've got postal workers, we've got movements people, we've got all sorts of skill sets that can be brought to bear. But in the great scheme of things, we're not talking about huge numbers here. So I think managing the expectation of us, riding over the hill and solving every problem, we need to be careful.
You mentioned the ambulance strike there,
Yeah.
and plugging that kind of skills gap to come in and help in those areas where the strikes are happening. What's the knock-on effect there? What would those people in the forces be doing if they weren't helping with the ambulance strikes?
Well, the first thing to say is we used to have our own military hospitals that were closed a long time ago, 30 years ago after the First Gulf War. But we now have military wings in NHS hospitals. So again, near me at Frimley Park is a military wing of the National Health Service Hospital. And they work day by day, every day, working alongside NHS colleagues in accident and emergency and indeed in routine operations and so on. And again, based in Aldershot is a medical regiment that would be doing training. Some of them may be deployed in operations, but at this stage, not many. There'll be some who are away in places like Estonia, but there won't be many away. So they would be training And obviously, in the context of some of the conversations that's been going on, they'd be looking forward to Christmas leave. But my experience is, they're not going to be overly fussed by that. They will respond to whatever they're being asked to do. They're a great bunch of people, and they will make, they'll make a difference.